All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Freight Advisors podcast. I have Dan Hellmann, Executive Vice President of Sales for Simple Logistics. Dan, welcome. You're our guest advisor today.
It's good to be here. Thanks for taking the time.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Thanks for being a guest. Man, you have tons of knowledge. I'm super excited that we get a chance to discuss. But I want to give you a quick moment to introduce yourself and what you do and your background in the industry.
Thanks. I just said my name's Dan Hellmann with Simple Logistics. I have been with Simple, it's like you blink and the time just flies by. Going on almost about 7 years now. Been in the logistics industry on the brokerage side I'm in my 14th year. So started straight after college. Started off with actually at TQL. I was there for about 6-ish years and just kind of fell in love with it. I fell in love with how fast paced it was. I fell in love that it all kind of rests on your shoulders a little bit, whether you're successful or not. And I'm just, I guess, a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, it's amazing how people get addicted to it. I was a political science and theology major, and in between finishing school and going to law school, a friend got me into working at Swift. And, I spent 6 months and I thought I was going to get out of it to finish up school and go to law school. Mm-hmm. And before you knew it, I was sucked in and I just never left. And it seems like that story is written on so many people's, faces and lives, because logistics seems to just kind of suck you in.
100%. I was also a political science major. Wanted to become a lawyer, and then realized it's not nearly as sexy of a job as it sounds.
Right. And of course, logistics is super sexy, right? So
yeah. That's the only job that's more sexy than a lawyer is a broker.
There you go. Well, what is it that you like about brokerage and logistics in general?
I would say that how fast paced it is, how things are always changing. I like the relationships they actually develop. Because if you work with your customers the right way, you do really develop some very deep relationships. Sounds cheesy, but to the point that they're actually friends. So I like kind of fostering those and hanging on to them. I also like that it's sink or swim. That it's up to you with how well you want to do. In a lot of cases, that the service levels we provide is a lot of times up to the actual individual itself, and not necessarily the company as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good point. A really good observation where, your ability to not only be successful in the space, but really be able to differentiate and set yourself apart is your ability really to communicate so often, not only your company's value, but your own personal value to those people who you're talking to. And I think for young brokers, young salespeople in general, that's such a huge, I think, mentality that is oftentimes left out. It's not always, it's hard to train to. It's kind of a natural ability oftentimes, but I think once you get it, once you have that mindset, I think your ability to make that connection changes. And I think it's where you really, as a salesperson, start to kind of come of age and really start to be more dynamic, because you feel more comfortable with who you are. But also the value that you have personally in a relationship that requires so much communication, like it does in logistics.
Definitely, 100%.
Yeah. So you're at Simple Logistics. Tell me about the company. Where you guys based out of? What do you if there's some main functions you guys provide? What is that?
Yeah. So our headquarters is out in St. Charles, Illinois, far west suburb of Chicago. I'm stationed out here in Denver, Colorado, our Denver office out in Nashville. Right now, with COVID, pretty much everybody's working from home. We're fortunate that our systems have allowed us to do that. We still keep service levels high, so it's actually working pretty well. As a company, we specialize mainly in produce and food grade. So we actually got started up. We were the in-house transportation arm for a company by the name of Burry Foods. We got started as more of like a cost reduction center, just to manage their freight and bring it in-house. Eventually, I came on board to kind of help grow into more of a traditional brokerage, and so that's kind of where we've evolved. Okay. Typical services, a lot of brokerages out there, mainly full truckload. We do some LTL, but our big niche is produce primarily, and then food service.
I can't wait to dive into that more. I'm a produce novice. I've done produce in the past, but never been really good at it. And so for me, getting people who are good at that, I think if you can be a good produce broker, you can be good at anything, right? Because, the how you sell it, the risk that goes along with it, just the mechanics and the kind of the complexity oftentimes within produce, of course, depending on what you're doing, but it takes a level of sophistication that not every brokerage is ready for.
Yeah. And just a lot of knowledge, you have to have a lot of knowledge because there's a ton of risk that goes into it.
Right.
And just how temperamental everything is.
Yeah. Isn't that true? I mean, I worked at a couple big brokerages in the past where we really tried to get into that produce space, and really, I thought kind of terrible at it. Again, and if you're not good at it, right, that amount of risk that we're talking about now becomes exponentially greater, right? Because produce itself is inherently risky. But if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't understand cold chain, all those things, it's just it could sink you really quick.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, the load values itself are massive. With FSMA, there's just a lot of liability sitting out there.
I know this is maybe putting your spot, but any crazy produce stories that you have? Talking to produce brokers a lot, they all have some kind of crazy story. I have one from a watermelon producer coming out of Mexico into the U.S. Got halfway through the load itself, the shipment, and found out that all the watermelons had been hollowed out. Somewhere along the line, had been hollowed out. I don't know what for reason. Someone told me that they probably took it and then juiced it, whatever it may be. I don't know what it was, but half of the load was all hollowed out from the watermelons. Crazy. I have no idea how that happened, but I feel like that's not the only crazy story that happens with produce.
Oh yeah, I mean, you get a lot of crazy stories. One, because there's a lot of hands in it. I mean, you have so many people touching every single shipment. And honestly, there's a lot of bad information. There's a lot of wrong POs and just knowledge how piecing it together. So you get a lot of that where it's just really bad product, or there's things in the truck that shouldn't have been on the truck, or every now and then you do come across, this hasn't happened to me personally, but you hear about in the industry of a shipment coming across the border. Every now and then you get drugs on it, get some pound. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. But every day is very, very different. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so you bring us up to a good question, right? Because you have tons of experience in not only the sales space, but account management space. And what you're speaking of when it comes to, the communication piece of it, I want to kind of start with a basic question that comes to something about expectations, especially, man, with this kind of post, or maybe not post-COVID is not the right word, right? We're still in kind of the thick of it, trying to figure out what exactly is happening. But it's always been, right, difficult to maintain expectations throughout a sales cycle. From your experience, from what you understand and what you've been mostly associated with, what's the most important piece of setting customer expectations so that not only you're successful, but of course the customer is successful in the process of moving their freight?
Yeah. So I think the first one is it's what you set up day one when you actually get them to become a customer. So it's that onboarding process. And this took me many years to finally get down, because I feel like it's really hard to set customer expectations in this industry because there's so many fires that you're always putting out that you do a really good job for one customer, and the next customer, it's just a bad day, and then those things slip through the cracks. But laying out of, what the customer expects of us, because every customer is going to be a little different. We want to cater our offerings to the customer, and not just this is what we do as a company, but how do we cater it? But also what I expect of them if there's issues that come up. A lot of times brokers won't figure out, what they need to do after hours, who they reach out to, what the fix is, until all of a sudden there's a problem after hours and they don't have the customer's cell phone or just know how to navigate it. So I'm a big proponent of having that onboarding call, laying out all the different, like, if this happens, how should we react? Just make sure we're not doing more than we need to or way stepping over our boundaries. And it also just sets the framework from the beginning that we are a responsible partner, that we know the ins and outs, we know our stuff, and it's going to be a smooth transition for them. So I always go into every relationship playing, this is probably the worst thing that could possibly happen. So how do we deal with it? Or these are 3 things that are most likely to happen. How do we deal with it?
Right. So kind of, exception management, right? Understanding that piece of the business and then kind of setting the expectation, right? That there's going to be exceptions along the way. How can we plan for those? Can we create SOPs around, certain things? And then be able to communicate that effectively. Is that kind of how I understand it?
Yeah, exactly. But I think one key thing when you go into that onboarding call is that also isn't done enough, is have like a true set agenda. Like we always have, I still have an idea in our mind what we want to talk about, but it's not very often that we actually have a typed out formal agenda. We send to the client ahead of time, hey, these are the 5 things I want to talk about. If you want to add anything, go ahead and put it on. It helps the meeting flow really well. You get straight to business. It respects their time, respects your time. And also what I love is that when you actually have a typed out formal agenda that you're going over, if it's on the agenda, you're definitely touching about it. Even if the customer doesn't really want to talk about it, but if rate increase is on the agenda, you're going to talk about it. So it kind of gives you a free card just to ask any question that you really want.
Yep. So important, right? And not only create that agenda, make sure everybody has that agenda beforehand, right? Because I think you're right. We started in my old boss, the CEO of Swift Richard Stocking, would hound us all the time about having written agendas. Could never have a meeting without an agenda. And so that was kind of driven into me. But this idea of agendas is important in the context of what we're talking about, either through the sales or account management process, because you want to be able to guide a discussion around the things that are most important, and you want to be able to articulate what's most important to you, but also you're hitting on the things that are most important to the client. Because if you don't do that, right, then you get talking, and also you missed all the main points that you wanted to discuss. And it always seems like that the ones you miss, right, are the most important ones, like the rate increase, right, or the large detention issues you're having at whatever location, whatever it may be. But obviously those things always seem to get lost, or forget to get mentioned within discussions because it's the elephant in the room and no one wants to discuss exactly what's going on.
Yeah. So it's a great tool for new sales reps, because it's often that new sales reps, they're naturally nervous to have these challenging conversations. And so let's say the conversation is already kind of on a little rocky ground in their heads, they're going to psych themselves out from actually approaching the subject. Or if it's on the agenda, they're going to hit upon it. So it kind of helps hold the reps themselves accountable to make sure they're asking the questions they need to ask.
And maybe we're nerding out a little bit because you're speaking my language here. But with each agenda point, right, you should have that list of questions built out, right? Especially ones that are delicate when you're talking to rates or talking about, operational issues that you're having. You should be able to, again, have those questions, outlined that you want to hit on, so you don't forget them, so you can take them off the box. Because, especially with new reps, as you're saying, because, man, you're so right. New reps especially, man, they get lost in that conversation, or they just don't know oftentimes how that conversation flow goes. And again, you miss the most critical and important parts of that conversation.
100%. I am such a proponent of actually writing out questions, before calls. If it's going to be a pretty big, important call, either I have it to have in front of me, or I have it just to refresh and go through my head of what I want to ask, how I want to ask it. It's just preparing for the meeting. And really, I have no problem with, those kind of scripted questions. Everyone gets turned off by script sometimes. The script isn't necessarily bad as long because it's part of the preparation, it's part of your practice, as long as you can use it in a conversational format. Yeah.
Is that something you train to when you bring on new reps? Do you have a kind of a formal, almost like an agenda SOP or some sort that you give to those folks so they have it already there?
Yeah. So I'm also a big proponent of just laying out the timeline. Like, this is what your first week's going to look like, your second week, 30, 60, 90 days. And I try and look at it as, we work with some vendors. It doesn't really matter who it is, but like where we're onboarding with them. And sometimes it seems like we're kind of stumbling around a little bit. I don't really know what's next to expect. And some vendors do an amazing job where I know every single day, week, and who's responsible for what. So we want our onboarding for our employees process to be very similar to that. To the point where I'm currently working with one employee where we have set coaching sessions. And so I throw them on the calendars so he knows we're going to cover, but also in the coaching sessions already have an agenda laid out of what we're going to cover and the steps to kind of walk through that sales process. So he knows that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, he has what meeting he has and what he's going to cover so he can then prepare before it too.
Right. That's great. And would you say in general, maybe when it comes to especially the new reps, I mean, it seems to me, right, in my experience in managing, lots of new people, especially that first 30 days is so important. For especially the ones that they're going to make it, right? You want that experience with those first, 30 to 60 days, be pretty scripted. I think this is where a lot of new managers get, and really experienced ones too, get it missed, right? Which is those first 30 to 60 days need to be fairly scripted. And I think you're spot on, which is, there should be a communication that, hey, these are the things that are going to happen every single week until you get, to that point where we think that you're ready to move on. Because again, you're trying to teach them the mechanics of being, good sales reps, good brokers, whatever it may be. And unless they have that, right, unless they understand what the expectations are from the beginning, through consistent feedback throughout the way, it just won't sink in very much, because they'll get lost in the process of trying to learn all the 100 things that they're doing without taking the time to sit back and say, okay, here's an experienced person telling me what we should be doing.
Yep, 100%. And it's just also giving them confidence in the process and confidence in the company that we actually have a true process and there's a reason why we're doing it.
Right. Do you use very much peer feedback or peer calls where you bring in other other reps who may be sitting with other people, or you may listen to phone calls between reps? Is that part of something that you guys do?
It is. We actually utilize call listening quite a bit. So actually recorded phone calls, a database of previous calls, ones that have gone really well, ones that have just fallen flat on their face, or here's an example of a fantastic opening or setting up next steps. So they're kind of all documented. That's a big one. And then working with new reps, listening to their calls, feedback. And then also a big one, actually two big things is then I'll actually make some calls, let them listen. One, to see how the calls flow, but also to realize that, yeah, I have 14 years experience. I'm pretty good at sales. I still make mistakes. I still get a roadblock sometimes or just go blank. Like, it does happen. We're all human. So when that happens to them, don't be demoralized from it. But really the absolute best tool you can do is just lots and lots of role playing.
Right. Yeah. Again, I think you hit it on the head. I remember one of my jobs in college was working at a call center for an insurance company, and we're a claim representative. And every week we had set on the calendar, these were the opportunities for not only my manager, but also my peers to do basically peer-to-peer call reviews. And there's a dynamic that happens between you and a manager when you're performing a review of, like you said, hey, let's pull up a call, let's listen to it, let's talk about, hey, these are the things that went well, these are the things that we perhaps have missed, or were important to the conversation that as a new rep you may have just understood. But even as an experienced person, you know, hey, these are the couple of things that you could have done to improve X metric, whatever it may be. But there's another dynamic that happens in a sales environment where you have that peer-to-peer opportunity for people of like positions to get together to talk about, hey, this is how this call went. What do you think? You're in that same position. What would you have said, or how would you have handled this obstacle, whatever it may be? That's a whole different dynamic that I think is super empowering.
All right, so Dan, so tell me, from your perspective, what do you expect from your new hires when you bring someone in and they don't have any experience, or even if they do have experience? What are your expectations for new hires?
I mean, ultimately, it comes down to it's a commitment from them to be open, honest, and transparent to me.
Mm-hmm.
Actually be honest of what they're struggling on, and not try and put on this facade that they're perfect and got it all down, because we're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
Also commitment from them that their willingness and open to self-educate.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to train them on how to sell, industry terminology, all the tips and tricks, but that's only going to get our employees so far. Like, they have to commit that on their spare time, they're reading sales books, that they're reading up on the industry, markets, different produce knowledge. Like, if you want to be a great salesperson, you have to self-educate. You cannot rely on just your employer to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's on you.
Yeah.
And then for experienced people, I mean, it's the same thing, but also openness, the commitment to openness and willingness to hear a different perspective than how they used to be doing it. I'm not saying that we're doing it 100% the right way, because I want to hear how they've done it too, but they need to be open to trying something a different way.
Right. Yeah. In a previous episode I interviewed a super smart lady, Shauna Kukin, regarding, this is about you as yourself projecting, value and developing yourself. But too often, I think for salespeople, even career salespeople, is this idea that you like you said, you don't self-educate. This, I think it's super important, right, to understand all the dynamics of sales. You can learn on lots of different ways, through watching the YouTube's full of really
Mm-hmm.
great content from really experienced people who know all the ins and outs of sales, or at least give you another perspective about selling. Too often, I think people sell themselves short in that continuing process of learning.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And, I also think with experienced sales reps, a lot of times I think that, that they have it, that they're good, that they don't need to self-educate.
Yeah.
But whether it's on LinkedIn, YouTube, or just webinars that are out there in the industry, I try and subscribe to as many as I can, because yes, I might already know 90% of the information that's on there, if it's specific, but I guarantee there's one or two things that either I didn't think of, or it sparks something of how I can evolve my sales process or my coaching process.
Yeah. Yeah. How much, for you and your organization, or you just as a sales leader, what's the appropriate amount of training, sales training? How have you seen it be successful? I mean, is there a certain level that you say, boom, here they should understand, and boom, we're ready to go? I mean, do you do ongoing sales training? How important it is to your organization?
So it is very important. I would say what really I think is the most important for ongoing is the role playing aspect, where that continues on for several months. I mean, if you want to give someone a crash course on selling, like, this is a sales process, these are kind of, a couple of questions to ask, you can knock it out in one day. Now, they're not going to be an amazing salesperson, but they'll have a good understanding of the process.
Right.
But until they are constantly practicing it and evolving it, that's really where that true salesmanship happens.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of the training out there you see with brokerages, they'll have a week in classroom, 2 weeks in classroom. But that's not enough. It has to continue on with that role playing and the coaching aspect.
Yeah.
Really, the coaching aspect should never really stop. Even if you have a sales rep that's been doing this for 3 years and they're solid, you still need to be coaching them along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and especially, I think that's so important in the brokerage space, because the market is dynamic, it's changing, and how you approach sales from, if you're talking, 2018 sales versus 2019 and now 2020, right in the midst and post COVID, I mean, the dynamics of that process is wildly different. And unless you're doing what you're talking about, which is a continuous improvement, continuous, sales, training, working on techniques, hearing yourself have conversations, unless you're doing that, you could, I mean, you're losing out. You could be 30 days, 60 days behind in your approach, because you don't have that continuous improvement process.
100%, especially with right now the current markets. I mean, they're changing so quickly that the messaging, the conversations that we were having 3 months ago are completely obsolete. Like our conversations we have with our customers right now, if you're having them right now, you're too late. You should have been having them before the market got crazy. But you need to be adapting your conversations, your approach with how the market.
Yeah. Well, and in this case, in the brokerage space, if you're behind, if you're not in front of the curve, if you're not projecting what's going on, then it shows up oftentimes in real dollars. It hits your
Mhm.
bottom line of profitability. If your sales reps or your broker reps, your carrier reps, if they're not properly techniqued in what's going on within the market and how then to sell to that, again, that shows up in a very specific way on you and your cost per load. It could look in gross margin or net margin. I mean, it has real implications if you're not good as a sales leader to
Mhm.
address those things as they're happening.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, from, do you have, so here you are, right? You lead a sales organization, and, as a sales leader for yourself, how important is it for you to have people below you, being able to tell you and express to you, hey, we're seeing some really crazy things, right now, either on the carrier side or the shipper side, whatever it may be, to be able to communicate that to you in an effective way for you then to kind of disseminate that down in a way where then people below you are making, better decisions.
I mean, it's 100% important to you to have that line of communication between yourself and other sales leaders or the direct reps.
Hmm.
But I also think sales leaders in this industry, we've been doing this long enough that we we know when the markets have a good idea of when they're turning a little bit.
Right.
So we're being a little more proactive. We're not necessarily waiting for the reps to bring it to us because we know what's going to happen. So we're kind of probing those questions
Hmm.
and watching the numbers closely. When you start seeing things get squeezed or service failures increase, and that's why that continual coaching sessions are really important because you can kind of get ahead of it before it becomes a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that inexperienced leaders, inexperienced people, all, they're just not doing enough of.
Hmm.
I think everything you're talking about is so important to the process, because again, any um, when you're slow, right, to the table, when you're slow, when things are happening upstream, and you're not aware of what's going on, again, as leadership, you're torched, right? Because you've then missed, a week's worth of some semblance of productivity, whatever KPI you're judging or you're monitoring, because you're slow upstream, because you're not listening to the people, actually on the phones day to day, and that could have catastrophic implications in your business.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
also sales leaders, you have to be tied into the customers too. There needs to be a relationship that you have directly with the customers also,
Right.
especially if it's a good sized customer and it's a younger or more inexperienced rep managing that, because you need to make sure you're tied in. So if that rep's having trouble having the difficult conversation, that
Hmm.
you can do it too.
Right. What's the best way, especially now? I think because you're seeing it, right? We're seeing the total, the spot market is completely, out of whack right now. Maybe not out of whack,
Hmm.
but is completely dynamic, right? It's changing, on an hourly basis in many cases. That's an important conversation to have, obviously internally within your organization. But you mentioned something that I think is important, which is having that conversation with your accounts, with the customers themselves, and that's always not an easy conversation. How do you approach conversations like that?
It's really just sucking it up and doing it sometimes,
Right.
because it's not an easy conversation. No one likes to raise rates. No one likes to have the conversation that there might be a lane that we just can't service as well as we used to
Hmm.
because of X, Y, Z. Brokers love to say they can do absolutely everything. The reality is we can't. We all have our
Right.
niches or we all have strong points. So I always get worried if someone says they can do everything.
Right.
They,
Right.
they might be
Yeah.
able to do everything, but not everything well.
Yeah. If your business model is I can do everything, then man, you may be one of the big guys. You really can do everything, but if you're a shipper, especially you're talking on the phone to some LSP that's telling you, hey, I can move this load in California as well as in Georgia. Typically, they can. That's usually a
Yeah.
red flag that, hey, these guys just want to load, and they're probably not experts in any space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it
So
has part of it has to go with having that conversation, but it's what makes the conversation easier is if you're doing all the right thing, all the little things every single day.
yeah.
You're being proactive in your communication. You're not waiting for them to bring up a potential issue. You're working ahead and bringing solutions. And if you have that personal relationship, it's an easy conversation to have because they know that they can trust you and that
Yeah.
you're not full of it, or you're not just looking to, chase the buck and, stick it to them.
Hmm.
But that comes from doing all the little things right every single day.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you understand this principle, and you kind of nailed it at the beginning, right? This idea of setting customer expectations and talking through with the customer from the very beginning, the onset, having that relationship that, hey, this is a partnership, and we're going to, talk about the business in realistic terms. Unless you're able to do that through, through any kind of economy, through any kind of, a freight market, whatever it may be, unless you can do that, then you're not doing yourself or your customer any good. You got to be able to communicate that, and the expectations are always changing based on the environment that's going on.
Yep, it definitely is.
Yeah. I wonder, especially for, in sales leadership like you are, being able to drive that down to the bottom line. Because like you said, there seems to be this idea often, right, where especially if your commission rests on that relationship between you and that customer, you don't want to rock the boat, right? It's hard to have conversations saying, hey, you gave me, X amount of loads. And typically, I would be able to move them, but this market's crazy and I can't do that right now. And this is, how do you approach that? How do you teach people to approach that subject?
What I tell our reps is have that conversation early and often.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have the conversation when all of a sudden, let's say you're moving a consistent lane every week, several times a week. You don't have it when it's become such a problem that you need the money right then and there because the company's going under, or you're about to lose your job, or you can't pay your bills without your commissions. You need to have a conversation first when you have an inkling that it might need to happen.
Right.
And then you back it up with not just your word, which should hold some weight because you got a good relationship with them, but also outside sources, whether it's videos, it's articles. I mean, there's so much information out there about the spot market right now with tender rejections and just the percent increase in rates. It's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And approach it not as going straight, I need to increase my rates, because that's not really a solution.
Right.
That kind of just benefits you, but how can we tackle this together?
Mm-hmm.
There's a holiday coming up. Can we be a little more strategic of when these picked up? Can we play with inventory levels a little bit? Can we have more flexibility? Instead of doing a hard pick up Tuesday, drop Wednesday, can it pick up Tuesday or Wednesday? Troubleshooting all different scenarios. So you're not just going straight to, I need more money.
Yeah. Well, in what's good about your experience and being able to talk to this is, you have a wide variety of brokerage and LSP experience. You now have some very, niche kind of particular experience in the produce space, which is so often, it's, super seasonal. There's obviously a whole lot happening within a very condensed amount of time. And that in itself presents challenges, but then trying to operate that model in a market like this, I can only imagine for you and your group, how probably overwhelming at times that probably is.
Yeah. And so pretty much how I personally went about it is, as I'm having conversations with some of our customers about rates, because they want to know some seasonal rates, or of course they're getting rates, in January, February, as COVID's kind of really popping its head.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a caveat of, to my, best prediction, best knowledge, but like, we're going to have to continually talk about these rates, just because we don't know. None of us here really knows what the next 2-3 months are going to look like, especially come, February, March. Is the bottom going to drop out, or are things going to spike? Like, this is unprecedented times that no one's been in before. And so we're all doing our best guess of trying to piece together as much information as we can. So having that conversation at the very beginning of quoting the rate, and then even if it's a scheduled meeting of every 3 weeks, we're just going to touch base on it real quick of what we're seeing and what we're thinking.
Right. From an LS side, right? LSP side, which we're talking about now, shipper discussion would probably happen a little bit different. But I think now is the time for a broker, for an LSP, to be overly communicative. And you really have to worry about your business it's super cyclical, right? There's broker markets, there's transfer, there's, trucking markets, and there's shipper markets. But now's the time for you as a business, if you're not already doing this, to really have, very important conversations internally about your business, about your business model, what's working, what's not working. Because at the end of the day, we need everybody to survive. One of the tragedies, in my view, that happened, through 2019 and now into 2020, really towards the end of 2018, was that, you know, um, you know, everyone was so concerned about, keeping their business, even bad business,
Hmm.
that so many people, especially in the trucking side of it, carriers in particular, were taking lots of bad business, just to have their trucks moving. And in some cases, you can, you can absorb that. But too often, a lot of the, especially in the smaller trucker space, we're making really bad decisions. And you know what happened at the end of the day is they all, a good percentage of them went out of business. And for a
Hmm.
shipper, yeah, you can drive down rates. You can, take advantage of relationships. But then we get to a situation like this where, you take a bad late 2018, 2019, you put a pandemic on top of it. All of a sudden capacity is nowhere, right? Because the ecosystem between the shipper and the carrier side was never really in tune, because they're not having really important conversations like you're talking about. And I admire really what you're saying, because for an LSP, for anybody, those are difficult conversations to have, but they're
Hmm.
super important, because you have to, as a group, we have to all be in business. We have to have some longevity in order as an organization, as an industry, to be able to survive.
Yeah. Everybody needs to make money. Just
Right.
everyone's got to make a little bit. And then they're difficult conversations, but I'm a firm believer, difficult conversations. And sometimes when things go wrong, that's how you develop relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things are going perfect in and out and it's seamless. It's hard to develop a really strong relationship till when, stuff really hits the fan. And that's when, the customer sees what the broker's really made out of.
Right.
Are they actually going to go above and beyond to communicate, to take care of their shipment, to troubleshoot the issues? Like that's when that's where a separation between good and great happens.
Yeah, man, that's so well said. My personal, for me, in the way that I manage, one of the lessons I learned at a company called MW Logistics, which was in partnership with Mart Transport. We were hand in hand with everything we did. I had super, a really in-depth experience and interactions with Martin Trucking and how they did their business. And they were, so awesome about a couple things that became important to me. Right. And I think it's important to a lot of people, which is you have internal metrics, you have internal KPIs that are important to you, but unless you're able to articulate that and tell and say that to the actual customer, then oftentimes it gets lost. Right. I think more people, including LSPs, but especially on the carrier side, should have really open, honest conversations about, hey, these are the KPIs that we manage, that we track. This is what it's living up to. This is what it's not being lived up to. And we need to have a real honest conversations. But without that transparency, without, all sides understanding and knowing the particulars of your business, without having carrier and customer scorecards, those real honest conversations can't happen. And I think
Yeah.
we as an industry need to do 1,000% better at that.
100%.
Yeah.
And then especially with when there are brokers, they're set their meetings, have their agenda, and they want to go over a scorecard, and they're the ones that are set themselves. Natural, inclination is that they're only going to highlight the good KPIs. They're going to highlight the good stuff. I'm a firm believer in here's some good ones, but here's where we kind of have really dropped the ball. We really kind of failed. It may not be as important to them, but we're tracking this. We're not doing a good job, and this is our plan to go forward.
Right.
Highlight the bad with the good, just to have that open conversation, so you actually can grow from it.
Right. Man, again, I think you're hitting it on the head. It's so important. It's so important. You just can't be afraid of facts. In environments like ours today, we get so hung up on, what's true and what's not true, and facts versus not facts. You got to be able to, with sincerity and honesty, look at the business and be able to say X works, Y doesn't work. And then really diagnose it. And unless you're diagnosing and having those conversations internally as well as externally, you'll never improve. And really good trucking companies, really good LSPs, a lot of good shippers, when they have that down, when they really understand that, they're successful. I really wish we could do more as an industry to help those smaller groups really have access to the right metrics internally so that they can perform the way that other companies can perform and be trained to do that.
And it's also looking at metrics and KPIs, not just how the broker's performing itself, but how is the customer performing too. And I feel like it's our responsibility. If we see they're not performing well somewhere and it's hurting them in the long run, like it's our responsibility to bring that up. Yeah. Maybe it's extended unloading times. And so we can break it down like, hey, this is taking an extra hour every single load. This is how much it's going to cost you in detention. And long term, it's carriers aren't going to want to go there anymore. You know, we've worked with some shippers where we have a carrier lined up ready to go and they find out where it's going. They're like, oh, I need an extra $300. I don't like it.
Yeah.
So they have to be carrier friendly. So they may not fully understand that. And so as you're tracking our own personal KPIs, track the shippers' KPIs and help educate them of why they might need to change things around.
Right. How important is for you to make sure that your sales team and your operations teams are in alignment?
It's extremely important, and it's also extremely hard at times. You know, we operate in a split division as a company. It works really well most of the time, but the struggle comes is if people are not following the processes 100% correctly, that's when bottlenecks happen. If the process is followed 100% correct, it runs so incredibly smooth. The same thing, we're using the systems correctly. And so you have to be very, very system and process focused. And that's where you can make these big, you know, leaps and bound jumps.
Right. Yeah, I think many companies struggle with the same thing. But again, differentiators, right? Companies that do it really well are those that are, super focused, hyper focused on alignment between their sales and operations teams. You know, it's an easy dynamic that gets lost so often. One of the hardest things in going to a company and trying to transform it is, especially if they're not good at it, is getting rid of sort of the consistent kind of battling back and forth between, hey, we sales organization, we operations organization. In reality, they need to be operating in sync together. In an environment or in a company like yours and the others that I've managed as well, is when you're a split model, we have sales and operations. It's easy to get siloed. It's easy to lose focus on, what exactly, who's doing what and what exactly is happening between the groups. But as you're talking about, how can you make a salesperson or an operations person, more successful if you're not sharing the right data with them, if you're not sharing, what the customer's expectations are, or if you're hearing something from the carrier side, if you're not able to communicate that back to sales, then everything you're talking about, which is, hey, this carrier came back and, asked for another $300. Well, how is that communicated to us, and how could we have avoided that so that we didn't have some of these issues that we're having currently?
And a lot of that comes down to just, day one, onboarding the employees. Like the employee, the team members need to understand what their roles and responsibilities are and how it all fits into the bigger picture.
Right.
And why paint that picture of why things be done a certain way. Because anytime you change something, there's people are resistant to change. And they may think it's easier to do it this way. Kind of explaining and showing why, like, easier is not always better.
Right.
And it might be a couple extra clicks, but the ROI is, huge on the back end because it's saving 25 clicks down the road. So it's paint that picture, make sure everyone fully understands like what their job responsibility is and how it comes together for the entire picture.
Right. Yeah. And for me, and what I've seen most successful is, if you're an executive or if you're in, management, at a management level, it's important that you understand the dynamics that happen between the groups. But fundamentally speaking, it's nowhere as near as important as if the bottom, the front line are the ones that are having that consistent conversation, those consistent conversations, unless you're taking the water to the end of the row, right? Then, the group dynamics will never function correctly. So your people at the front line have to be, super dedicated to this concept that we're talking about, which is overly communicating between the groups and understanding what's happening on each side of that business to fully function.
Yeah. And both sides, whether it's the sales or operations, they also need to fully understand, or at least a good understanding of what the other side's job is and how some of these hiccups or issues that happen, how it affects their world and their relationship with their carriers or with their customers.
Right.
You know, it's easy for sales to sometimes say, yeah, we'll just tell the carrier the load's no good, give them a truck order not used, and not understand all the other implications that happen down the road, and vice versa of, oh yeah, we're going to have to push this load, so just let the customer know. Like,
Right.
there's a lot of other things that spiral into that, whether it's how it affects the business, but also the understanding that maybe it took that carrier sales rep, he's been working on trying to establish this lane at this carrier for the past 3 months, or the customer sales rep, they have been prospecting this company for 12 months, and this is finally their chance. So there's a lot of that, you know, sweat equity and that emotional side of it.
Yeah. There's no culture killer greater than having somebody work their tail off to try to come up with a solution to something, only to have it fall apart at the operational level, whether because of communication, because, you know, sales or the carrier side operations didn't understand what was going on, or there was something that was missed that could have been easily communicated to have remedied it, and then have all that time you did go to waste. And again, that's a killer. That's a morale killer. And organizations are oftentimes very bad at that, mitigating some of those easily, you know, fixed, you know, things that you can solution for to make, you know, everyone's jobs and lives easier. Man. So for you, just with a couple minutes that we have left, you know, for you, if you were going to, you know, articulate something or communicate something to either to leaders or to those in coming up and new in this space, how should they approach their, you know, their job, their daily, you know, organization or schedule in order to become the best that they can become?
Tough question. So how leaders approach their job, just kind of get themselves be the best they possibly can be.
Learning new skills. I mean, how to stay relevant, how to stay, you know, because again, so dynamic what we do. You know, there's daily habits that, you know, I always like to ask questions about around daily habits and how, you know, you can accomplish how you as a leader become better as a leader, you know, if you're new in the industry, how to get up to speed and so that you're, you know, the most efficient as possible and do the best job that you can.
So as a leader, I think it also comes down to the same way as, you know, sales reps need to better themselves. It's that self-education, but just on a different level or a different aspect. It's that coaching and leadership aspect may not necessarily how to fine tune their skills. Now, I think one of the great things is these type of things right here. It's these networking events. It's actually taking time and putting yourself out there to meet other leaders, share ideas, and brainstorm, and be humble with that. When, you know, you don't know something, just come out and say you don't know it. You know, we all don't have to have everything together all the time. Like, there's people have other experiences, but then also remembering what it was like for your sales or for yourself when you first started. You know, what did you go through? What struggles did you have? And being present and available for your reps so you can make their lives easier. As sales leaders, our job is to clear the way so salespeople can actually sell.
Right.
So what can we do to make our sales reps' lives easier?
Yeah, huge. I really like that because, you know, you start to progress in your career. You seem to, you know, forget about what it was like when you were just starting out. When I started out, I was, you know, managing, you know, a team of owner operators, 70 owner operators. Man, if I could go back and, you know, tell myself and really kind of go through that whole process of learning transportation and trucking, man, you know, if I forgot some of those lessons, I would never be, you know, I just wouldn't be as efficient and effective as I am. You know, having gone through those experiences, you know, made me, it's made me a better leader, but it's also made me more empathetic to kind of the process of not only trucking in general, but what goes into actually moving load from point A to point B. And if you forget that, right, if you don't, you know, take a time to reflect on what it was like when you were coming up in the business in whatever way it was, you know, you miss an opportunity to teach from experience. And I think what you're saying is, it really is that, which is, hey, you got to understand, know the experience that you went through so you can help, you know, teach that and communicate that to others.
100%.
Yeah. Well, good, man. Dan, I really appreciate our time. You did a great job. You talked about, you know, networking. This is an opportunity for, you know, for you and I to network, but if you're part of the industry, understand, get to know the industry. If people want to communicate with you or pick your brain or maybe ask you some questions, what's the best way to get in touch with you and to have some interactions with you?
I would say connect with me directly on LinkedIn. I'm definitely blocking off time each day to be much more active because, like I said, networking's huge, but it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
You got to put the time in and dedicate that time. So connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can start conversations through there.
Yeah, good.
Well,
Good. Well, I've appreciated definitely connecting with you. Yeah, I don't know anything about produce, but now I know someone who does, and if I have questions about it, I can always. That's the power of networking. That's the power of widening your net, so to speak, so you can really understand different aspects of the business that you may not understand. So I appreciate your time, Dan. You did a great job again. I hope everybody. I'll make sure to link your information to this podcast, and have a great day.
great. Thanks a lot, Jared. Appreciate it.
Thanks.